Sit. Oh, today, let's see, what do we have? Thank you very much. Today we're going to hear from the prime sponsor of SB 589 local, Senator Bertzel. Do we know? Sounds familiar. Welcome, Senator. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee, for hearing my prime bill, Senate Bill 589. For the record, my name is Regina Bertzel, State Senator for District 19, which encompasses the towns of Derry, Hampstead, and Windham. And I am the prime sponsor of Senate Bill 589. This was a request by the town of Derry, much like we did a few years ago. We put in a bill, I put in a bill to enable the collection of water rights to Derry that would allow them to put money towards economic development in the town of Derry. This is of the same genre. What it does is enables the collection of a limited surcharge on certain wastewater services from Derry to be able to put towards economic development. Right now, I think they're limited, but I see that the town administrator is here and he can go through the issues that they've had.
Wonderful. Senator Waters with a question.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If I may, and perhaps the town administration, but there's a section in here about natural gas pipeline development by municipalities. Is that something Derry's doing now, or?
I would have to refer that to the town administrator.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
And is the town, let's see. Dave, would you mind coming up?
Morning.
Morning. And if you can hit your microphone.
Sorry?
Perfect.
For the record, my name is Dave Karen. I'm the town administrator for the town of Derry, and I'm here to request your support for Senate Bill 589. As Senator Bertzel just stated, 3 years ago, the legislature assisted us in establishing wheeling charges, which allowed water to be wheeled from Manchester Waterworks to communities south of us. And the town did incur some costs during that process, so now we have $1 per 100 cubic feet for a wheeling charge. This is on the wastewater side. Currently, state statute allows communities to charge a 15% surcharge on water services. There is no enabling legislation currently to allow for wastewater. I'm sure you've all noticed the Exit 4A project over on I-93. And actually to the east of that, a lot of people think that the Derry line is on the east of the highway. Actually, that's still Londonderry. And to maximize Londonderry's development potential, they have requested access to the Derry wastewater facilities. We currently service Londonderry wastewater along the Route 102 corridor. And the town council has agreed to assist Londonderry in its economic development. But we also feel we have an obligation to recognize the vast investments made by the Derry taxpayers and wastewater customers over several decades, upgrading and improving and supporting our wastewater system. So the recommendation of the Senate Bill 589 would be to allow the town to apply a 15% surcharge on all out-of-town sewer customers. Those funds would be placed in a fund similar to the water wheeling statute under RSA 38. It would be allowed for the extension of water and sewer and natural gas, of which we have no plans to do that, but it is in the statute. And it would also allow us to invest in economic development activities, which are currently allowed under the TIF district statute. The impact would be about $2.26 per quarter per residential customer in Londonderry. And it wouldn't generate a lot of money for Derry at the outset, but it will show that we're rewarding the Derry taxpayers for their investments in our facilities, which makes the development in Londonderry possible. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. So, you know, it's a good idea, and I'm certainly for the the basic principle in the bill, but I did wonder about lines 21 and 22, because natural gas pipeline, if you don't have a municipal gas company now, it seems like an outlier in terms of use of wastewater funds for natural gas infrastructure. And I mean, as I'm sure you know, natural gas infrastructure is a very complex regulatory matter. So if that wasn't in there, would it really make any difference to you?
Thanks for the question. It would not at all. So if the committee feels comfortable striking that line, the town of Derry would have no objections.
Well, thank you. I mean, I don't have a real strong opinion personally, just stuck out and I wanted to ask. That's
Understand.
all. Yeah, thank you.
Any questions? Well done.
Thank you.
All right. Mike? And you're part of the town of Londonderry, okay.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
You need that. You,
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Mike Malaguti. I am the town manager in the town of Londonderry, and I'm here to alert the committee to the fact that Londonderry supports this legislation for the reasons that have been discussed. This is, just to orient the committee to what we're talking about here, the Exit 4A area on the east side of the highway is part of the Woodmont Commons Planned Unit Development. That project is comparable in terms of geography and scale to the Tuscan Village project that's, has so much notoriety. And it straddles I-93. We're talking about here the part of the project on the east side of the highway, approximately 200 acres. And I want to talk about the original program that really was built into the planned unit development, the master plan that the town entered into with the developer about a decade ago. It envisions uses that are of vital importance, not only to Londonderry, but the regional and state economy, including a number of residential units. This area was programmed for 353 residential units, 420,000 square feet, and 300 beds of institutional use. No limit on civic uses, 200 hotel rooms, and 700,000 square feet of commercial use. So all of those uses carry a significant sewer demand. In order for the promise of the master plan to be realized, Londonderry needs access to that sewer capacity. I would just emphasize that this is not automatically, the legislation would not automatically impose a surcharge. It would have to be negotiated pursuant to an intermunicipal agreement. We have an intermunicipal agreement with the town of Derry. It was renegotiated a number of years ago, and this just allows some more choice in terms of, and some more flexibility in terms of what municipalities can agree to. So for all of those reasons, Londonderry supports this legislation. I'm grateful to the committee for hearing what I had to say, and I'm happy to take any questions.
thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Pearl.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in today. So do you feel that this would be a better situation for Londonderry to be able to agree to pay this surcharge, through the contract rather than to be forced to build its own facility?
Without question. We're talking about, similar to natural gas, we're talking about systems and infrastructure that are vastly expensive. Londonderry has sort of a split system. We send, roughly half of our sewer capacity in the north part, our sewer flows in the north part of town to Manchester. In the south, we're much closer in terms of proximity to the Derry plant. A 15% surcharge may sound like a lot, but it would be built into the total town rate, and it would be relatively modest from that standpoint.
Thank you.
Senator Waters.
Yes, kind of the same question that you don't currently have a municipal natural gas system.
We do not, correct.
So would it, I'm all for this development. I think this is great, and the municipalization, good thing, but I think that the natural gas thing will create some issues. So if it isn't, if you don't need it, I think it might be simpler if it weren't in here.
So Londonderry's position on that is exactly what Mr. Karen stated. It really is of no importance to us for today's purposes. If it becomes an issue in the future, we would obviously talk to our legislators and come back. But would have no objection to that going away.
Thank you. And just for the record, I mean, over in my area, great project to bring in methane from the landfill down to the university for their power plant. Terrific project, but it was not on the taxpayer. It was dime that did that. That was funded by the developer and the university system. So I just in terms of putting something on the taxpayer where the sewage and getting its development done, great, but I just want to make sure we have real strong consensus around it. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're very welcome. Ari Pollock? Kevin, do you want to testify today? You're just here in support? Yeah? All right.
I can feel the support right behind me. There's my red light. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Ari Pollock. I'm an attorney at the Gallagher firm in Concord, and I am counsel for Pillsbury Realty Development. They are the master developer of the aforementioned Exit 4A Woodmont Commons planned unit development. The project is entirely located in Londonderry, but it's right on the municipal border, and it's a stone's throw from Derry's wastewater municipal plant. This legislation will open up some enabling to allow some regionalization, even beyond what exists under today's intermunicipal agreement, to allow us to flow some waste to the Derry plant instead of having conversations with Londonderry about creating its own plant. I think the choice to be made here, frankly, is a 15% surcharge or 100% of the costs of developing a municipal plant. And so we pick 15. We can be the example you're looking for of a development that really has trouble moving forward and realizing its vision because infrastructure like sewer is not readily available, and these types of arrangements need to be made. I thank you for your attention.
Appreciate it. And any questions? Well done.
Thank you.
And Josh Elliott. Ambivalent.
That's his middle name.
Professional.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs for the Department of Energy. If you're wondering why I'm testifying on a sewer bill, that's a good question. The Department of Energy does, in conjunction with the Public Utilities Commission, have oversight over regulated utilities, and this RSA 362, which usually we're discussing a whole bunch of matters dealing with electrical infrastructure rather than water or sewer utilities. But the department does have oversight over these. The department is neutral on the concept itself. As has been mentioned with that 15% figure, that is consistent with elsewhere in that exact same statute. Actually, if you go up a little bit, municipal water companies have the same allowance, the same 15% figure, so it is consistent with the rest of the statute. This statute specifically in itself is an exemption from regulation as a public utility. So this is making it clear that yes, you can do this 15% without being considered a public utility. Which in hearing the discussion prior, I don't think Derry has any interest in becoming a regulated public utility. I don't blame them for not wanting to do that. But again, this extends that same exemption that is currently enjoyed by municipal water companies, where they can extend service across municipal boundaries and not trigger that requirement to become considered a public utility and regulated as such. This extends that same allowance to the wastewater side as well. In the letter that I have going around, we do have a request for an amendment language that is on the back of the letter It is unrelated to the issue that Derry and Londonderry are speaking to, but it is an issue that has come up in our rulemaking process. I had spoken to Senator Birdsell about this prior. As you know, with the creation of the Department of Energy, we've been going through our rulemaking process. There has been, as part of revising what will eventually become the Energy 700 rules, it's the PUC 700 rules at the moment, that there is an ambiguity in the statute that, without being corrected, would require the Department and the Public Utilities Commission to regulate all community sewer systems as public utilities. So this is everything from condo associations to homeowners associations that may have a community sewer system. So there may be a large, individual septic tanks, but one large leach field. This is pretty common with some developments of where you have increased density where you don't necessarily have ready access to sewer, which where we would see one of these systems put in place. Prior adoptions of the rules have relied on either legal precedent or memos from the Department of Justice as to allowing this exemption to move forward, which has been approved in the past by GELCAR. However, in this go-about of revising these rules, GELCAR staff has come to a different opinion, which is completely fine and entirely within their purview. But just adding, literally in the same section of statute that we are talking about in Section 1, just rather than Roman 3, we're talking about Roman 7A, which is just further down in the statute, just adding within that section or the two words "or sewer." So making it very clear that the Public Utilities Commission and the department do not regulate community sewer systems. That being said, this does not change anything about how DES would regulate these systems. All of that, those are taken care of in other statutes. This does not change how they are regulated from an environmental standpoint, but it just makes it clear, confirming the status quo, that these community sewer systems are not to be considered public utilities.
Josh, where would we put this amendment? What line?
So it doesn't exist in the bill as it currently exists, but it's the statute that you're amending in Section 1. It is just further down in that same section. So this would be amending RSA 362.4 rather than, as you see in the enacting language, Roman 3 for Section 1. This would just be Roman 7. So it's just further down in the same statute that you are currently amending in Section 1. So it could, in theory, go in as a Section 3, or it could just be, I mean, I would defer to OLS as to how they want to handle it, but...
So we're looking at line 9, maybe?
Yeah, between 8 and 9.
Yeah, you could probably just tack it in there. I would defer to OLS as to how they want to structure and how they want to insert it, but just adding those two words, or sewer, would clean up this, no pun intended, this issue and make it clear that there are, that these community sewer systems are not to be considered public utilities.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Well done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Catherine doesn't say whether she wants to speak or not. But you do support, yes. Okay. That was our final support, and there is nobody else to speak on this, so we will close the hearing on SB 589. no, that's all right, it's good. Yeah, we can do it in committee. Yeah, we'll do it in committee.
All set?
All set.
All right, we'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 301 and introduce the prime sponsor, Senator Avard.
Thank you, members of the committee and Mr. Chair, and for the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, prime sponsor of SB 301. And basically, the bill creates a committee to study the possibility of putting a desalinization plant on the seacoast. Now, a study really is basically a conversation, and this basically drew from one of the, a study that we had on what do you call it, landfills last year. And, you know, this topic came up, and, you know, with all the contamination that's going around in certain wells, say around, just because of the Coakley plant and whatnot, contaminated wells. Just for discussion and for edification, I wanted to see if this is something that's feasible. It's a kind of a plan B. If we have a natural disaster and a lot of the wells become contaminated, having a desalinization plant in New Hampshire, you know, it's a thought. Trying to think outside the box and having something that's available for New Hampshire just in case, you know, we have some type of natural disaster or some type of contamination that we're not aware of that could, you know, affect all our wells and our aquifers. So I would like to see if we could at least just consider having the conversation. Doesn't mean we're going to put it there, but at least we can talk about it and maybe tease out some solutions in case we have a natural disaster.
Thank you. Actually, I have one question. On line 5, would you be opposed to changing the 3 members of the Senate to 1 member of the Senate?
I was actually going to have 12. Yeah,
Could we just put your name in there?
just
as
put
the
my
member of
name
the
there, it's
Senate?
fine. I'll take up the time to do it. I'd be happy to. Yes.
Further questions from the committee? Senator Altshuler.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my questions. I have a couple of questions, so I'll give the chair a moment to let you know I do have a follow-up. I was very curious about this because, well, first of all, everybody on this sponsor list is all from a landlocked area, and not a single member of the Seacoast was consulted or asked who did this come from, since no one on the Seacoast seems to have been consulted.
From me. From me.
From you. Okay, follow up, Mr. Chair?
One more, sure.
Sure. Well, so when you came up with this idea, did you think that perhaps maybe reaching out from Seabrook on up to Newcastle and maybe out through Great Bay, any of those water commissions, town managers, water waste treatment commissioners would be, which should be consulted in whether or not this, first of all, has been addressed on the Seacoast, and second, whether the Seacoast thinks it's necessary?
Well, I mean, it's a study, and so I could consult through all those resources that are there through the study.
Follow up?
All right, we'll give you one more. Go ahead.
Thank you. So in the interest of making sure that all of these people, who many of them are volunteers, and we do have a lot of waterways professionals, would not be asked to put their time into just a curiosity of a senator who may have absolutely no idea about what's already been going on. Did it occur to you that perhaps consulting with this long-term Seacoast Drinking Water Commission or the Seacoast Commission on Long-Term Goals and Requirements for Drinking Water, or some of the previous work that's already been done in researching desalination would have been a better place to start rather than convening an entire group of people to redo work that's already been done?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Birdsall.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. Would it not be one of the issues, one of the things that this committee would do is bring in members of the Seacoast and the commission to get their thoughts and processes on a desalination plant?
That is correct. And it is to bring to awareness what is going on in New Hampshire. We're hearing over and over again where the wells are being contaminated, and if there's a natural disaster or a terrorist attempt or something to that effect, I want a plan B. I want to see if we can at least have something that is a resource for New Hampshire. All those resources that you had mentioned, Senator, those can be part of this, but this is more than just a curiosity. I think we need to start thinking outside the box, and that's what this is all about. And it's not a waste of my time.
Further questions? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. So New Hampshire has 18 miles of coastline, as compared to, say, a state like California that takes up 2/3 of the coastline. And they have ruled out desalination as an acceptable way of accessing water, and they're experiencing even bigger drought than we are. Was there any curiosity in perhaps looking into why some of the states that have larger drought issues, larger natural disaster issues, do not use this particular method?
Yeah, I don't consider California as a role model of anything at this point, to be frank with you. And I think that it was a huge mistake for them not to have a desalinization plant. But I think because of their drought situation, I don't make the rules out there. All I'm asking is a study.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none?
Thank you very much.
Ted Deers from New Hampshire TES.
Oh, glad you like my bill. All right, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for allowing me to be here today. My name is Ted Deers. I am the Assistant Director of the Water Division at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. There is a letter going around right now, and so I'll wait just a moment while you get that in front of you. And also another piece of information there for you. So I have been involved in water supply issues on the New Hampshire coast for about 20 years or so. We've been involved in a number of different studies. I had a groundwater study back in 2004 that I worked on, as well as trying very hard to get plans in place for Exeter to have redundant water supplies, not to mention the Spruce Hole Aquifer project in Durham, all of which towards the concept of this bill have been to diversify the water supplies in the Seacoast region. So with that, I will just say that the department takes no position on this bill, but I would just raise a couple of items for your interest to look at. The first is Senator Altshuler already talked about, the Long-Term Goals Commission. I would direct you at some point to take a look at their annual report. It was available, it's on the Senate website, and it has the information of kind of what that commission's been up to this point. And it's a pretty broad range of discussions that have gone on. One of the things that have come out of that was an RFQ. A request for qualifications for somebody to take a look at overall water needs in the Seacoast area. What I passed around to you is the list of tasks that are on that RFQ. That went out, I think it was in November. A consultant has been selected. They have begun work on that study. It'll be done sometime either later this year or next year. So what I would only point out in terms of this particular bill and the work of that commission is that in order to truly understand where desalinization or some other water supply would fit in to the overall needs in the Seacoast, you have to understand a couple of baseline pieces of information first. One of those is, what is the actual need? Where are the interconnections? where do we already have supply? Because sometimes it's not just, sometimes what we find, and this was the case certainly, and you just had a conversation about southern New Hampshire. What we've found in our studies of the southern New Hampshire is that there's plenty of water. It's just not where we need it. And so the issue really has become one of interconnectedness, not necessarily of the need to develop new water sources. So before one were to pursue something like a very large, expensive desalination plant, one would want to understand what are those interconnectedness, where's the water at, where it's ain't, so to speak, and be able to understand what would be needed, pipe sizes, all of that kind of stuff. That's what's being looked at right now through the long-term commission, long-term goals. I always forget what it's called. Long-term Seacoast Commission on Drinking Water, sorry. That's what's being looked at right now. So I would just maybe make the point that starting this look at desalinization should occur after that project is well in hand, because it would inform whatever were to be looked at that point. Before you have that, it's really a speculative understanding what would be the need, where would it be needed, where are the pipes, where would you have to run those kinds of things, where would be the best location for something like this. All of those would be informed by the work that's currently underway with that consulting firm. So those were the things that I just wanted to point out to you at this point. It's information you might not have had in front of you, and to let you know that there's some really good progress going on, especially in looking at those seacoast issues that you identified in your testimony, Mr. Chair. That very issue of making sure that we have water where it's needed, when it's needed, regardless of the situation. So there is a lot of prep work going on that, and what you're suggesting to look at may be a good follow-up. So that's kind of where I'm at today. I don't have anything else to say, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Senator Waters. No pun intended.
Clean waters.
And one low salt. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ted. And looking at 485F5, which is a pretty extensive piece of legislation and a lot of work to get that passed, is a good thing to do.
Right.
Would there be a place within the duties of that to mention a look at desalinization?
Thank you for the question. That did occur to us as well.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily have an opinion about that. The commission, and again, I encourage you to grab their annual report from last year. It is a very, very active group. And so they have a lot of interesting things going on. It definitely has the right, players, I think, would be part of, if that's part of the question.
Just to follow up, so it wouldn't be extraneous and perhaps maybe even helpful to the duties, at least to mention in statute desalinization, so that if they decided that was an option to look at, they would be authorized to do so?
I think someone could at this point squint at their current legislation and see it in there. But certainly, doing something like that doesn't seem like a horrible idea. But again, I would want to I'm not sure if the commission has had a discussion about this bill or not. And I just don't know that.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
I have a question.
no.
Thank you. Man,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you very much for taking my question. How familiar are you with desalinization and the byproducts of desalinization?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I am not an engineer. I sometimes play one on TV, but I am not an engineer. And so what I understand from the looks that we've had at this, and we've had a couple of looks at this over the years, is that where you generally want to withdraw the water is somewhere that's brackish, that it's not pure salt water. You're not taking water from the ocean. That's generally what I understand. So when you start to sort of narrow that down to places in the world where you would have sort of that mixed brackish water, you can often end up in some sensitive habitats because those are essentially salt marshes or sort of the periphery of which you then have the potential to draw in additional saline waters into those groundwaters. So doing that part is tricky. making sure that you're in the right place to find that right mix, because you don't want to be at 32 parts per thousand, which is what ocean water is. You want to be at something, lower. You want to be at, a few parts. So there's a very different way of thinking about that, when you start getting into the nitty gritty of it. And then, of course, there is the issue of the brine that's produced as a result. It has to go somewhere. Salt is conservative. You can't treat it. You can't break it apart. It becomes essentially just brine. And that also has other constituents in it, which might be in seawater or in the groundwater, which would be associated then with that brine. And so you have to do something with that as well. And so, I think there's people that have talked about using it for de-icing in the winter. There's people have used, talked about that. There's people that have talked about it for other kinds of products that could be created, table salt, things like that, sun salt, as they call it. So those are some of the things that have been looked at, and so far the primary issue that's come out has really been the energy costs associated with that, because you're essentially forcing it through a membrane it doesn't want to go through. That's at least the current technology.
Cool.
So that's what we've looked at in the past in terms of understanding it. But there is a desalination plant in New Hampshire already. It's out on Star Island, and obviously. They don't have a lot of choices. There ain't a whole lot of fresh water out there in the middle of the ocean. So there's water everywhere and not a drop to drink except from the desalination plant.
All the more reason to have a study on this. Well, Senator.
Thank you for taking my question. On the desalination plants, now, this is years ago, but when we were in Aruba, they have a desalination plant. They have no other concept of fresh water. So they use the desalination plant. But they also don't have any brine water. And I believe, is it Saudi Arabia or one of the Arab countries also uses a desalination plant from water. So I don't believe they have brine water around them. Is it just the areas that have brine that use desalination?
So I'm not sure. I will just be honest, Senator. I don't know what other technologies they're using, whether they're bringing it directly from the ocean, if they're drawing it from groundwater, where it has some smaller percentage of salt water. I don't know how those systems work. So that would be something that, again, could be looked at some point.
Thank you.
Senator Altshuler.
Thank you. Thank you very much for taking my question. And just to fill in a knowledge gap for you and to comment on a previous question, that actually Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Qatar are responsible for 55% of global brine production. So it is not brine-less in their desalination at all. I am unfamiliar with Aruba's desalination, so I can't speak to that, but I can tell you that 55% of the global brine production does come out of those places. You mentioned Star Island, and Star Island is only open for about 3 months a year, right? With about less than 100 people, and they do use rainwater runoff, correct? Okay, so it's not completely dependent on that, and they do bring in some water, right. Is that not right? I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that when you are constructing a desalination plant, when you've looked into it even a little bit, with or without a study, we know that it has to go in places with brackish water, and we have a limited amount of brackish water here within our 18 miles of seacoast extended, if you consider Great Bay. So do you know where that brackish water would be? That would be the ideal spot?
Thank you for the question. I don't know that. Again, you'd have to look at the
Great Bay.
You'd have to look at everything. You'd have to look at wherever that is available. There is a study that we are just completing right now that is looking at the potential effects of sea level rise on groundwater infiltration. Mm-hmm. And so that's another place in which that would help to inform this question about where is water in the future in the seacoast area and what might be impacted as sea level rises, and understanding what the groundwater dynamics would be in those places. It's a tricky question, but we do have there was some capital funding that came in the last budget, thank you, that made that study possible, and that's happening right now.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
I have nobody else wanting to testify on this bill, so we're going to close the hearing on 301. Pass that over. And I think 386 is next, right? Just me. Look at that. Uh-oh, another study.
9:39.
Okay.
Good morning again, Senator. We will open the hearing on Senate Bill 386.
Thank you, Senators,
Prime
and for the
sponsors?
record, I'm Senator Kevin Abar, the prime sponsor of 386. Years ago, when I was asked to chair this committee, I walked into the room and I looked at everybody and I made a mea culpa saying that I know nothing about energy. And as a direct result of that, I created a study. Why? Because I knew nothing about it, and I thought it would be very helpful to have a study on energy. And this is in the same spirit of that. And basically, this bill establishes a committee to study power, generation, transmission, distribution, and lo and behold, now we have storage. And that was a new thing as well. And I think for the legislature, for people who actually walk into this committee and have absolutely no idea what energy is all about, and the things that, not that I'm looking at anybody, it's very helpful. And it's helpful for all involved in a study like this. And we can identify sources of power generation, investigate their need, consider potential costs, research the latest information on storage capacity, which is something that is becoming up and coming. So I thought it would be helpful, and it helps everybody to get acquainted with some of the needs that we have. So that's the spirit behind this bill, and I'm hoping that everybody likes it.
Thank you, Senator. Questions from the committee? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thank you.
Josh, you're the only one on here, so I guess you're next. And you found that comfortable middle spot of ambivalence again.
Again, ambivalence is the theme today from the department. Good morning again, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs for the New Hampshire Department of Energy. The department is neutral on the bill. I think Senator Abard laid out the reasons for it to take a look at some of these issues. If I recall correctly, I think it was Senate Bill 125, and I know there was a companion bill that same year, although we're forgetting which year that was. But this is a very long-winded way of saying the department is happy to provide any support requested for this study and be happy to participate.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Josh. So, I think this bill makes sense, and I'm co-sponsoring it, obviously, but doesn't this make particular sense to do this kind of in tandem with the department's climate action plan? Because you're off to the races on that, and I think that the legislature is kind of informed about what's going on with that, and that's kind of what this bill is too, isn't it? It's some of the same areas that's looking at.
So that's actually our colleagues at DES who are doing the climate action plan.
Yeah.
Yes.
But having said, but you know about it, right?
Yes. Yes. We've seen the PCAP, and I know they're working hard on getting the final version, which I think is due early April. I'm sure someone from DES can correct me on that timeline.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. And I have nobody else wanting to speak on this, unless somebody wants to speak on this. Going once, twice. Thank you very much. All right, moving right along.
Phil, do committee members have copy of the amendment for 543? Do they have them? Okay. and I've got some for the public.
Oh, yeah, look at this one. Thanks. All right.
Give me just a
Yeah.
moment, Mr. Chairman. You're going to get copies of an amendment, and
All right. Okay, pick up 100.
you have a copy yourself.
We've got a couple of minutes, so I'll be right back.
So everybody's going to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator David Waters, District 4, to introduce Senate Bill 543, establishing State Environmental Adaptation, Resilience, and Innovation Council. And just for your information on what I have before you, I'm going to stick with the original bill for the first page or so, and then for the rest of the bill, I'll be talking from the amendment. That makes basically some trims and changes to make it more efficient process. So this bill is about planning and risk avoidance. I think it is time for us to look at the ways in which careful planning across agencies can help us avoid risks and save taxpayer dollars as we look at a changing environment. And I wanted to give particular thanks to all the people who have helped make this in a form that the departments and the agencies basically feel can work well, particularly to Commissioner Scott, but also HHS, a lot of good help from Homeland, from DOT, and others to look at not only what planning they already do, but what more planning they'd like to do and why it's just essential that they plan together, which is the impetus for the bill. And I also want to thank very much the Nature Conservancy and others who are willing to offer some help to get funding and grants and support the activities of this, as was done with an earlier Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission about 10 years ago. We had mention of the Climate Action Plan just a moment or so ago. We have a $3 million grant from the federal government to conduct a climate action plan. That really is on the so-called power generation side and the mitigation side. What can you do about power generation that might mitigate? And so I think the bookend here is, okay, that activity is going to look at the energy sector, what we're doing about that. But this is a way for us to look at, let's plan for resilience, let's plan for adaptation, let's plan for the taxpayer. So I think that with the two of these together, the state will be in a good place to make sure that we protect the environment we all so care about. So I just wanted to start out with a purpose statement and then look at some of the ways in which the council will be put together, and then some of the things that the council would look at. And certainly it comes from a place of what we have seen over the last few years about what changes are coming to New Hampshire's environment and how we need to start looking at adaptation, resilience, and innovation leadership at the state level so we can help our communities, businesses, and institutions become more resilient and ready to adapt to the changes. And clearly as we are seeing, environmental change is affecting communities all across the state. It's not only challenges to state assets and infrastructure, and indeed this is the focus of this council we really see is on state infrastructure, because municipalities and others, while we may coordinate with them, have to do a lot of their own planning as they should. But it's not just infrastructure, it's also public health, as we heard from HHS. It's tourism, natural resources, water and wastewater services, revenue sources, the economy itself, which depends so much on our environment. So we need to have some creative adaptation. We need planning. We've got to make sure we have a prosperous future no matter what nature may throw at us. And why planning is important is it'll help us to prioritize the allocation of investment in public resources to prevent negative impacts and ensure investments that are durable and equitable, especially to most at-risk populations. Just a little aside example, we have spent $1 million or $2 million year after year, every couple of years, to replace the same culverts and roads in certain parts of our state. Well, wouldn't it be a lot more effective to do a kind of planning so that we know, based on projections of extreme precipitation, what kind of roads we got to take care of in a different way? There are going to be disproportionate impacts on certain communities along the seacoast, obviously, as we just heard from the study that Ted Deers mentioned about groundwater intrusion. So this is about effective planning, how it can facilitate more efficient function of state and local government, how we can promote economic prosperity through that, and particularly workforce development, public health, and all policies, and protect our families and the natural environment. But just a couple of definitions, so that the scope of this is around adaptation and resilience, and you can see those there. At this point, Mr. Chairman, if people could turn to the amendment, because this, for the rest of the bill, this is a kind of a trimmed up and more effective version. So it seemed to make sense that this would be a council, not a commission, in part because of the restrictions around a commission having to have a majority of legislative members. Also, this work really is the work of state government agencies and what they're going to do. And of course, if they will come forward with proposals, and that's when the legislature should work on it. So it seemed to me that this would be a more effective and efficient way of conducting the business here as well. You will see on it various commissioners, which I think represent the agencies that are responsible for the duties that get laid out here. I've had communication and participation and work with the people mentioned here who have made an awful lot of good advice about the language here and what kinds of things ought to be looked at by such a council. And you'll see that obviously this council can ask anybody to come in and talk with them, but it's important to have municipal association, regional planners, some nonprofits, and business and industry associations. So you'll see those folks are on there as well. The second page of the amendment gets into the details of how this works, but I wanted to point particularly on page 2 to section 4. And, here are these principles of how to look at building resilience, public health, business and workforce development, natural resources, and then particularly partnerships. What kind of partnerships does the state need to form so that this work can get done? Educational institutions, we've already seen a bill in the Senate about how we're going to look at air conditioning for our public schools and how we're going to pay for that. So it's important for the people be brought together to form these kinds of partnerships, and particularly how we will look at partnerships that can help provide grant funding and staffing for this effort. I'll get into that a little bit further later about the kind of really substantial funding that is available from the federal government that's just kind of passing through rulemaking and will be available for grants for these activities. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. So Section 5 gets into some of the things to do. And I will just pause for a moment to say that these sections of the bill develop not only with folks in the state, but I've looked very carefully at what other states are doing. The states around us have taken different approaches based on the state government, whether it's an executive order or by legislation in Maine and Vermont or down in southern New England. I look particularly at what has been done in Pennsylvania. They're the only state so far that has done a comprehensive study that looks at all the projections of what's going to happen and then costs it out. And they're looking at like $11 to $13 billion they can expect of costs in Pennsylvania. Now, we're a very different state than they are, but it gives an indication of the things they looked at, the kind of basic 4 or 5 buckets of areas: transportation, their coastline, and so on, and increasing heat. They looked at the kind of things, and so looking at those various states and talking with our state agencies, that's why we got these kind of buckets of activities here. Probably need some mapping, and we have very good the coastal mapping we have, and you can go and look at very careful projections of sea level rise, storm surge, extreme precipitation, down to the a few meter plot to see what's that. But there may be some more needs for mapping. I think particularly transportation. What are the areas that are being impacted right now by extreme precipitation and flooding, and what will likely be in the future? Agricultural lands as well. What has been affected by floods, or what's likely to be affected by floods and droughts, so we can get a handle on those things. Review existing activities. We do a lot of good planning. The DOT, the 10-year plan, is essentially a planning document, and we have in Homeland, they do a lot of planning related to FEMA-related emergencies. Health and Human Services had some grant funding up until a couple years ago to do some planning around health impacts. And so there is planning, but the point here is to see how do we coordinate these? How do we look across agencies to understand where the gaps may be in planning, or how things can be leveraged among agencies as well? And then, as I said, work from existing studies. We do have the New Hampshire Climate Assessment, Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission, and the Coastal Adaptation Working Group, which is ongoing. So that region of the state has some ongoing planning activities. Look at the public health. You'll see in D, starting there. Look at adaptations related to extreme heat, so that we not only about heating shelters, but also our public schools and public buildings, which may not have air processing now. I saw a study that said that if you do air filtration and air conditioning in schools, test scores go up by 5 to 10%. It seems to me the cheapest way to improve outcomes of students. And so we're going to need to look at a lot of this, especially as what happens in May and June when it's getting kind of hot. As a member of the Transportation Committee, number letter F on page 3 is going to be awfully important for us, is to make sure we have coordinated planning there. Storm drainage capacity, municipal facilities, coastal defenses perhaps, adaptation and resilience, using natural marshland retreat. There's a lot of good work being done on that, but we really need to coordinate that with transportation and with other kinds of things as well. Emergency preparedness, not only the way we kind of think of in FEMA, but also for vector-borne diseases that are accompanying what we're seeing with flooding and what could happen with sewage and so forth. And then adverse impacts to forest and agriculture. We're already seeing a lot of that right now with invasive species, but also with the habitat shift and what impact that's going to have on our forest products and tourism, other things as well. And our state parks. And then on lines 19 to 23 on page 3, I wanted to get into some of the economic issues that I think here, so I think it's just so important we try to save taxpayer dollars. And so this is the section that really kind of gets into that. What about revenue impacts that we potentially may see? Already, Standard & Poor and Moody's are using resilience and adaptation strategies that municipalities and states have when they decide to give the credit rating and the bond rating. So it's important to have, take a look through the Department of Insurance, through our Department of Revenue Administration, just to see what they may need from us to be doing about resilient adaptation so that we get the best possible rating on our bonds. Need to look at potential loss for agricultural products and businesses and the cost impacts on municipalities, utility water supplies, and so forth. And then 24 to 29, make recommendation of potential funding sources. There are a lot of states that are looking at cost recovery. You'll see some suits that are underway in various states and municipalities about cost recovery here. I think also there's clearly going to be much more federal funding because states just can't do this themselves, whether it's water infrastructure or coastal defense areas that, there is some substantial funding coming through now, but there's going to be need for more in the future. Then on the bottom of page 3, again, this is the kind of the model from the Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission where we set up a science and technical advisory panel. Which would look at the existing science to say, okay, what's the baseline here? What can we expect in terms of temperature, increased precipitation, coastal issues, so that the folks on this council will have a kind of a baseline to know, okay, what are we going to plan for? We have the an action plan or an assessment that was done a couple of years ago with some grant funding. We also have every 5 years the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel. This is in statute, meets every 5 years to update the projections on sea level rise and storm surge for the coast, to give us a kind of ballpark figure for 2050 and 2100, what to plan for. There's also the 5th National Climate Assessment, which came out last year, which has a whole, there's a couple thousand pages in there and thousands of pages of research, but it has the whole sections on the Northeast from which we can extrapolate New Hampshire out of all the data for the Northeast there. This effort would be led by the state climatologist, Professor Mary Stampone of UNH. She's one of the 3 people responsible for creating that earlier report a couple years ago. I've talked with her. She had a lot of good ideas about how they could help make this efficient work for the council, and she reiterated her sense we really need to do this in terms of, as speaking as state climatologists, what we can expect. We really need to have this kind of effort. So if I may go on to the last page, I want to talk more particularly about staffing and funding. Had a lot of conversation particularly with Commissioner Scott, who, and I think we'll hear from DES that they understand and the necessity of doing this and for agencies to work together but clearly concerned about staffing. I have done a couple things about that. You'll notice that the bill, the implementation date of it, while it's effective immediately, it asks for some preliminary work that would fit in with a budget cycle, so that agencies would have time to look at whether it's under the, the 10-year plan, or whether it's under Homeland, or whether it's under other departments, that they can look at what kind of planning funding they might need. But also, as I mentioned, there's substantial funding in the IRA bill. We're already seeing some of that come for coastal planning, but the way the federal government works, they pass that substantial funding for all kinds of planning, but they're working through the rules, and then they'll release the RFPs to the states for that. So I think we will see that. But I also will mention that there is an interest by several of the nonprofits in the state to seek grants that might be able to provide staffing for this effort as well. So that's why this working group is mentioned here, to look at how we're going to handle the support for this council going forward. But you'll see there is no fiscal note on it right now, because I've structured it so that the fiscal impact, if any, of this activity will take place in the due course of time. The bill does establish a fund, so that if we get those federal grants or there's support from other sources, I had mentioned from DOT that they already have some funding from Federal Highway that they send out to the regional planning commissions, and there's no reason that some of that might not be designated for the activities here. Also in Homeland Security, FEMA funding for planning and so on, Health and Human Services. Anyways, I mean, there is plenty of activity underway that the people I've talked to said that, yeah, we could probably find a way to contribute some of this. That's why a fund is set up, and that will be there for those uses. I have been long-winded, Mr. Chairman, but I think it's an issue that is going to deserve cross-agency attention, and I think this is a model that's been, worked on by a lot of folks. I'm very grateful for that, but I think it's something that, combined with the Climate Action Plan, is going to set New Hampshire up to deal with the future we have to face. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Oh, was that a question?
I do have a question.
Okay.
I had a badly timed sneeze. Thank you. Thanks for bringing this in. As I'm looking through this, a thought came to me. I mean, well, you certainly are looking. You've mentioned agriculture several times in here, which you obviously know piques my interest always. You do have the commissioner or someone from the department on. I'm wondering, as I'm looking through the other members you have, if maybe we should consider adding a member from the New Hampshire Farm Bureau on, only because while the department will look at policies related to implementing, the Farm Bureau might look more at policies that would look at the impact onto the actual agricultural industry.
Yeah, I thank you for that, Senator. And, I bring a bill to the committee for your wisdom and your sense of how we might make it better. My strategy was, and if you compare the amendment to the original, was to try to, since the council could ask anybody to come talk with them, and there might be 10 or 15 more people. I mean, I took the Attorney General's office off. They're obviously going to be involved in some things in terms of if there's going to be a lawsuit, but I said that can wait. So if the commissioner and you think it'd be important to have the Farm Bureau on now, yes, it makes sense. But you can see how I think that there's a chain of people that might also be on it too, but that's why we have a hearing, and let's make it work.
Follow?
Well, yeah, I fully understand. It was
Yeah.
a thought, because I mean, you could add every organization in the world on here, and I get that. But there's probably no other industry that's really going to be more impacted by than agriculture itself, which certainly our food is one of our most important. So just a thought I had. Thank you.
And I agree. Thank you, and I agree completely, because this strange cycle for agriculture of drought and flood. I mean, it is really difficult And we are just going to have to make sure that we do the kind of planning for resilience that we may not have thought of before, of ways to help out the agricultural sector. So I do think in particular for New Hampshire, this is an issue we've got to get a handle on sooner rather than later. So if it seems to make sense to add the Farm Bureau.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your hard work, Senator. Commissioner Jasper, would you like to speak?
Yes, sir.
Ambivalent.
Good job. Good morning, and for the record, I am Sean Jasper, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food. I want to apologize to Senator Waters. His office did reach out to me, and in the last few weeks I've been underwater, so to speak, and just was reviewing things this morning and realized that I needed to be here. I certainly believe in pre-planning, and I think that we need to be looking at these things. I am going to say that I don't think that the Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture is the best suited to represent agriculture in this. We're largely a regulatory body and really don't have expertise, so I'm going to throw somebody else under the bus, and I only notified him just before I came over here, and that is actually the director of the New Hampshire Agricultural Experiment Station. I think that while there is a representative from UNH that's more focused on climate in general, and I think that's a good appointee, but I really think because of the work that the Agricultural Experiment Station is doing, actually looking at how we can adapt to growing new things and dealing with the climate, that a representative from the experiment station is really a better pick than the department. Certainly we would be glad to weigh in on certain policies, but I think having a regular membership on here is not the best use of my time, nor the best use of a seat on the council.
So the official title of that is?
Yeah, I typed it off here. It's the director of the New Hampshire Agricultural Experiment Station, but.
Thoughts? Questions?
All right.
Thank you very much,
All
Commissioner.
right, thank you.
All right. Kurt? Annenberg.
Whatever. Whatever works for you.
Well done.
I appreciate that, Senator, very much. Kurt Ehrenberg, State Director of Humane Society of the United States. All I wanted to add here was just we want to think about adding animal rights, animal welfare advocate in some form on the list. That is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Questions from the committee? No. Seeing none. Thank you very much. All right. Going down, let's see. Senator David Waters, you already spoke.
You want me again?
I think you did a really good job.
Yeah.
Roger Stevens? Stevenson, yes. Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to testify in support of 543 with several amendments. My name is Roger Stevenson, and I'm a resident of Stratham. In the past 15 years, New Hampshire's, since the Climate and Economic Plan was published, resilience and adaptation have been the focus of a number of different and unconnected programs, reports, initiatives in the public health, natural resources, and business arenas. And often these have been local or regional in scope. One example is Weathering Change, New Hampshire Business Leaders on Risk, Resilience, and a Shifting Climate. This was a convening of 100 business leaders, no politicians, no advocates, simply to have a discussion in the morning on what was happening outside their windows from their perspectives as business leaders, whether they were in agriculture, transportation, distribution, groceries, that sort of thing. This is not online, but if the committee's interested, I can get you a PDF copy. The purpose of the council, as stated in the bill's preamble, is straightforward and on target. It's about comprehensive awareness and planning to mitigate risk. The chairman, in his testimony on SB 301, brought up risk and risk mitigation, and perhaps the notions of desalinization can be folded into this somewhat in some way. The Advisory Council is about recommending contingencies in the face of disruptive weather and environmental hazards. And contingency planning, as presented in the Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission, is precisely why the report's recommendations at that time received unanimous support from commission members, conservative and liberal alike. No sector is immune. The Advisory Council is about improved awareness across multiple sectors, about the changes we're seeing and what scientists are projecting. Increased awareness is key because disincentives to act are strong, given some of the impacts of environmental change are a long way off. And also, we don't know exactly how bad it's going to be, but failure to prepare or putting off preparations is a mistake. I do encourage amending SB 543 with respect to commission membership. As written, the council membership is top-heavy and state-centric, and I think considering adding members to the commission who can bring their sectors to the table on a frequent basis, who can act locally, and who can promote information and recommendations within their sectors could be advisable. We have practitioners, residents, homeowners, local leaders, and business owners with firsthand experience with repetitive disasters, as well as healthcare professionals, engineers, and scholars dealing with the aftermath. We can toss out these ideas, a strong mayor, the Bi-State Primary Care Association, a community bank, county government representatives, a local chamber of commerce come to mind. The New Hampshire Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission is a good example because the legislation, and I was privileged to have a hand in helping draft that originally, the legislation establishing the commission was amended to include a representative from each tidal and coastal town. Doing so contributed significantly to local understanding and subsequent local decisions and ongoing actions. Second, I'd encourage you not to limit, and maybe Senator Waters' amendment relieves the DES of council chairmanship, but I suggest the Commissioner of Health and Human Services serve as co-chair. Public health networks and community health centers are on the front lines of extreme weather risks, and I think your colleagues heard testimony on Senate Bill 496 on the Climate Health and Protection Program recently. But I've worked with the public health networks, and I know they're on the front lines. I know they are overburdened. I know they've been hollowed out before the pandemic, and they continue to need resources. But they have used an evidence-based approach to assess the roles of environmental change on existing health burdens, including heat stress, disease, and mental health. I'd ask you to consider adding the commissioners of the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, as well as the Insurance Department, for a variety of reasons that I've outlined in my testimony. I have, as part of my testimony, a number of resources here. I can email this testimony to you so you have the hot links available to you. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator Waters with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Roger, for being here, and just thanks again for all the incredible work on the Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission and some follow-up work as well. And so your advice comes with a lot of authority. Let me just mention a couple of things. You'll see what was done about the chairmanship to not designate, and I think that I heard you very well. And I did talk to HHS, and their feeling was maybe they didn't want to co-chair, but that we'll let the commission figure that out, because I do think that the idea here of a kind of a broader responsibility, because this is so cross-cutting. Also, I just wanted to point out that we decided to go with the BEA planning person rather than a commissioner, and I can see it both ways. On the larger question about more expansive membership, I mean, I can see it both ways, but my question coming out of this is that would the provision in the bill for the establishment of working groups maybe be a better way to bring together people to focus on particular areas than having them on what would then become a very, very large commission?
And thank you for the question, and I appreciate your reticence. I recall that similar response when Senator Stiles said she'd sponsor your bill for the Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission if you added 15 more members.
Yeah.
But I do feel that, so, insofar, and I've only seen your amendment today, your idea has merit if each of those working groups had a chair that was a member of the commission, so that they had responsibilities of reporting back on a regular basis.
Yes. Good point. Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Ted Dyers. Ambivalent.
It's the theme of the day.
It is. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm still Ted Deers, and I am still the Assistant Director of the Water Division at the Department of Environmental Services.
That didn't change in the end.
Well, I didn't hear from the commissioner yet from my previous testimony, so we don't know what will happen after this. But for now, I still am. So I appreciate the eloquence and length of Dr. Waters' presentation this morning on this bill. I think that he covered all of the sort of goings-ons around, especially with the department relative to a lot of the coastal work going on. I would just point out that we are getting pulled in a lot of directions on various different sort of these, resilience, adaptation, response kinds of things going on. I would point to the good folks in South Ackworth that very nearly lost their community-run general store. We have a project in the works right now to try to help shore up Bowers Brook, which is completely unraveled. We're seeing that in a fair number of places, especially along the Connecticut River watershed, where we are seeing this sort of unraveling. That is, that streams, smaller streams in steep areas are seeing flows that they've never seen before, at least since, before the last ice age. So these are some challenges that are going on around the state. We are responsive. We've put $6 million of ARPA dollars towards culvert and high-risk culvert projects. Those are going on right now. So there is a lot going on, which, while certainly we appreciate this bill in terms of its coordination factor amongst all those things, the concern that we raised and the concern that Commissioner Scott raised, both to Senator Waters, and we certainly have noted that in our letter, is a resource issue. I've worked for the state for 27 years. I've never seen a time in which every single person around me is beyond capacity in state government. So it is a very, very, very tough time right now just because of the amount of work going on, which is great because we have lots of resources going on because of the IRA and bill money. But it also stretches our resources pretty thin. So our concern with this has really been a resource one in terms of being able to provide staff which we expressed to the senator. The amendment certainly gets us closer to being comfortable with where this is headed, because it does constrain this a little bit. It does put a time factor, although I will note that there's a correction needed. Back to the Future. But that it does have basically a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think that's important for us as we look at resources and resource allocation to something like this. And also the fact that it's not all on DES. I think, as the senator noted, there's a lot of people who are interested in this. You're hearing that. You're seeing that from the group assembled here, that there is a lot of interest, and there will be people who will bring resources to bear, I think, should this move forward. With that, I would also just note that there is a fund created. We've heard from a lot of communities around the state of people looking for dollars to do various different adaptation resilience projects. We don't have a fund in state government oriented towards that. So that is something that should be looked at certainly in the future as to what is needed and what could be done in the future to support communities. These projects are expensive. This little project on Bowers Brook, just to basically rebuild that the stream essentially, and then there's downstream infrastructure on the road that DOT is also concerned about. That little project alone is $360,000. So this stuff comes expensive, but it's something that does need to be looked at. So with that, I will see if there's any questions.
Senator Waters with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ted, let me reiterate, as I did earlier, my thanks for your extensive work on this. And your work and my conversations with the commissioner had a lot to do with changing this, and your participation in creating the amendment. So I wanted to kind of just get a little bit more to the amendment in the particular, so that you'll see that we no longer specify it has to be DES Commissioner's chair.
Right.
And so that checks a box for you?
That certainly helps. Yes,
Okay.
Thank you. It's the care and feeding of a council like this can be a lot of work. Yeah.
And then secondly, the kind of narrowing of some of the focus of activities, and we did chop out a fair number of things from the original, and you think that kind of helps DES get its arms around what role it may play in the future, depending on how this goes?
Yeah, I think that the way that we thought about this, again, thank you for the question. And we said this in our letter of testimony, you'll see, is that we were hoping that the focus of this council, at least at its outset, would really be on coordination of state agency work. Because all of the agencies, as you've heard, and we'll hear from other people, I'm sure, is that we're all doing a lot of work on this issue because it's an issue that affects so many of our constituents in lots of different ways. So we are all doing a lot of work. So this idea of having a place in which some of that was coordinated was, I think, from our perspective at this moment in 2024, looking at this, just understanding what our sister agencies are doing was an important piece, and that for us was key. So I do think that the narrowing of the tasks, as you have illustrated here in the amendment, does work towards having that as the focus, so that we're not creating sort of new work.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're really helping to understand each other, what we're already doing. I would also point to the words by Commissioner Jasper. I happen to sit on a technical advisory committee that is advising sort of the future activities of the Agriculture Experiment Station and Cooperative Extension as they're working together on some of these issues relative to our farms around the state. So I serve as a technical advisor, and I would just suggest that that's a good place to put representation, as the commissioner noted.
If I may, one more. So thank you. And I mean, I think you do hit the nail on the head that this is really a kind of a coordinating council, and that it will be free to determine its own work schedule. And I would assume that the first parts of the work will be, as you mentioned, on the coordinating factor. But the kind of other area that I know was concerned to Commissioner Scott was the funding and staffing. And would it be fair to say that at least the way the bill does, and without a fiscal note now, is because it envisions a process of whether it's federal funding or some coordination through grant funding with nonprofits, that funding issue will not necessarily fall on DES. And so is the model that is now here seem to be workable in terms of the financial concerns that DES had?
I think we're more comfortable
Yeah.
with the idea that it's not on us. We're not clearly staffing this. That was the concern that we had,
right.
is that DES was clearly staffing this. And as I've noted, we have lots of advisory councils, we have lots of commissions we've worked on, and it can be, especially the way it was originally written with 4 meetings a year, we felt that was pretty much most of a human working on that. And we don't have one of those to spare at this moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well done.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I have a colleague who would like to join me and testify.
It all depends.
Matthew Thorne.
Okay. I'm just kidding, Matthew.
I missed the dress code, so hopefully this works out.
Good morning. I'm Meredith Hatfield with the Nature Conservancy.
Matt Thorne, Adaptation Manager at the Nature Conservancy.
And our testimony letter is going around to you right now. And I just wanted to, a lot of the things that are in the letter have already been said, but just wanted to mention a couple of things. The Coastal Risks and Hazards Commission, I think, really can be seen as a real success on bringing people together, learning, and working toward helping our coastal region prepare for the changes that we're seeing. And we really see this new council as building upon that. We also see it as a really nice companion to several of the bills that the legislature is considering right now in order to provide resources to communities as they're facing these issues. So while those short-term responses are clearly critical, stepping back and taking a look at what's happening and planning for response, we think is important. We are one of the groups who really sees this up as a priority. And as we've spoken with DES and with Senator Waters and others, we are committed to supporting this work. So if you do move forward with this bill, we would be at the table whether we're on the council or not. There are 2 environmental nonprofit seats, but even if TNC wasn't one of those, we are fully prepared to be there. And we, as Ted and others have said, there is a fair amount of funding that's available for this type of work. And my colleague has been quite successful, actually, in bringing a fair amount of money to New Hampshire for a variety of projects. And he's going to speak about at least one of those now.
Great. Thank you, Senator, members of the committee. So today, New Hampshire as a state, we're really not keeping up with the storms and the floods, the heat, the drought, and that's today. So blown out roads, water supplies drying up, houses getting lapped by the sea, and it's a drag, as folks have said, on our economy, on our farms, on our tourism. It's a drag on my daycare, which can't seem to stay open 5 days a week. So business as usual is not really working today. We're certainly not prepared for tomorrow. For the next Mother's Day flood, for the next Alstead floods where 4 people were killed. And if you haven't seen the footage of what happened in Alstead, take another look. Even though it was a couple decades ago, it's sobering. And the next Superstorm Sandy, the next Irene, we're not really ready for snowless winters and weeks at a time in the summer over 100 degrees. So I would sum up my testimony as an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This bill can help bring about the effective coordination that we already talked about among state agencies with local agencies, scientists, and the day-to-day practitioners on the ground. It can bring about innovation through really smart planning and financing research about the feasibility of different financing options. We can find efficiencies and cost effectiveness. Again, we can't leave this to the taxpayer. We can't just keep going business as usual and let all the costs be a burden to the taxpayer because they're only going up. There are towns that have been waiting for years for FEMA reimbursement to rebuild, and often just rebuilding the same structures that got us here in the first place. So a metaphor for all this work is fairly simple. Part of the time I get to work on the world of culverts, those pipes under the road that most people don't pay attention to. So I get to work with our allies at DOT and in our towns on culvert upgrades. And there's really two methods that you can see play out to simplify things. One is where we coordinate the transportation experts, get the fish people, the flood experts, we use good data, and we check in with the community and we build them right the first time. And that culvert will last a century. The second way is where there's not much coordination, there's not effective planning, we're rushed, using old data, and it really blows out at the first storm that you see. You do an emergency repair, kind of slap it back together until the next storm. So that first option, it's a higher upfront cost and takes more work and effort when everyone's so busy and all the agencies are really strapped and the towns are strapped as well. That's a hard choice to make, but it's a more durable outcome. And the other method, the blowing out at every storm, it's cheaper up front, but it is a constant headache and it's more expensive in the long run. It's a threat to safety and it's a real drag on the community. It can be really defeating, I think, for some of these towns that feel like, when's the next unpredictable thing gonna, ruin my day? I can't get to work. My daycare is struggling, or even worse. So, yeah, I just wanted to support this bill and reiterate, as Meredith mentioned, that the Nature Conservancy is happy to support some of the meat and grunt work of this council, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
So you did mention FEMA, and if you're not the right person to answer this, I can maybe ask DOT. But I have seen, as a result of the most recent storms, particularly a lot of reporting out of Massachusetts and Maine, where you have a community that may or may not quite hit the threshold of FEMA requirements for disaster declaration for funding, so that they don't quite hit it, but then next year the same thing happens, and it's $1 million, but they have to get it's $2 million for the threshold. And so I don't know if you could speak to any experience with that in New Hampshire. I know our governor has been really aggressive in anything that happens to try to make sure the federal resources come in, and we just successfully got the funding that the governor advocated for emergency declaration for the most recent floods. But I mean, aren't there examples where the communities are kind of left hanging because they don't hit the FEMA, there isn't a disaster declared, and they're stuck with the bill?
Yeah, I can't speak authoritatively on this, but I do know that towns do struggle to get repaid for disasters, whether it be the wait period or challenges with the proposals, or just not, again, enough effective coordination between agencies and town staff. And that can play out whether it's a disaster or even preparing and trying to get hazard mitigation plans accepted by FEMA and through Homeland. So there's challenges on many fronts that this bill tries to address, that coordination, that knitting together, so we can work together to more find those gaps where towns, taxpayers, and people are just feeling a little left out and defeated.
And just to comment, it's not just the municipalities. I mean, businesses, if there's a disaster of some sort but doesn't hit the FEMA level, the business is left, with a flooded basement or whatever, or loss of business, they're left hanging too. So I think that, as you mentioned, those gaps, that's something that we've got to plan for. But thank you.
And Senator, just to add, I think there may be some needs to change some federal rules and requirements, and I think that's one of the things that this work could surface. Yeah. And then we could advocate for that together to try to shake loose some of that funding.
I'm sure we can make lots of suggestions for the feds. Any more questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. And I believe our last speaker will be John Evans, unless somebody else wants to speak. New Hampshire Department of Transportation, your name came up a few times.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm John Evans with the New Hampshire Department of Transportation's Bureau of Environment. I'm the project management section chief there, and I'm here on behalf of Commissioner Cass, and we are, the department is in support of this bill, mainly because there's, as you know, we have a very robust environmental review process that we go through for all of our projects. And a lot of times there can be conflicts between kind of priorities when it comes to making sure that when we try to address, say climate change or the needs behind climate change, sometimes those can actually result in additional environmental impacts for resources. Kind of the idea basically being that you may have some additional impacts now to help see benefits later, and so we see this as a bit of a almost a sounding board to a certain extent, to seek assistance from our partners at DES and DNCR and Fish and Game and such, where they to help kind of acknowledge that the fact that in order to address some of these issues, we may in fact we may have some needs for additional environmental impacts associated with addressing climate change issues. So, and then as we've also discussed, there have been a number of events that have happened even over the course of the last year. These are extremely expensive for the department, and we oftentimes are struggling to find the proper resources to address those, and this would help us kind of plan into the future a bit, as far as what would be the priorities as far as addressing certain things, rather than dealing with them as they come up later, and likely more costly, as we heard, an ounce of prevention goes a long way. So with that, I'll open it up if there's any questions.
Questions from the committee? Well done.
Thank you.
Don't have anybody else that wants to speak on this? Going once, going twice. We are closing the hearing on that. Is there a motion to move into exec? So, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. I'd like to take up this bill right now. So SB 543, there is a line on the amendment.
Well, I'll move on to pass, just to have
Yeah,
that.
I'd like that. Is there a second? Second. Okay. Discussion. On the amendment 0935S.
Yes, I'll move the amendment.
Okay. Now that it's seconded, discussion. On line, I think 13, changing that from the Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture to the Director of Agriculture, was it experimental
Station.
The agricultural experimental
Station.
Experiment
You
station.
get that? Okay, we all good with that?
Yeah, I think actually if we do that, that would cover my concern about putting the Farm Bureau on.
Is that enough? You
Yeah,
think that's okay?
that would do it, because that's gonna be more about the application and practice of farming more than the policy related to it. So I'm good with that.
Was there anything else to be added to that?
Let me note on page 4, line 26, that,
I'm sorry,
the,
page
Back to the
4?
Future?
yeah, the repeal date is not 2007, okay?
I did see that.
Yeah, it should be 2027, okay? Yeah, Back to the Future.
You get that, Phil? Line 26, yeah. It's 2027.
I didn't read that right.
Oh, I did, I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, I must be not looking at that right.
I wasn't really reading it.
But that's what the Back to the Future was, so I was looking at that right. Okay, so we were listening. Any further discussion about the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I will note the comments of Roger Stevenson, and I think that the working groups cover his suggestion that the idea that working groups, I mean, I can see a working group on the health folks, yeah. I can see potential working groups on agriculture maybe. But his idea about if you're gonna have the working groups, be sure that there is a person on the commission who is essentially attached to that working group. And I think we have that. I don't think we need to change the bill, but I think his notion that we make sure that the working groups have that kind of embeddedness into the commission. I think that's a good idea, and that when the commission meets, I think that's certainly what they will see as a way to go. So I just wanted to respond to what he had presented.
So in our talking points or as passing, when we pass it, can we just mention that?
I think that was something I could mention. It could be.
That, so it's in the record. And we would like that copy PDF if you don't mind. I'd like that. Just, yes, please. Yeah, if you don't mind. So with that being said, Senator Altula?
Yes. So, Senator Waters, there, with regards to what Mr. Stevenson talked about, I also, I'm recognizing that a very serious piece that might be missing from this is insurance. And this is, you know, the insurance doesn't necessarily fall under any of the particular groups that are here, and that, as we know from some other states that are experiencing insurance issues with large companies pulling out because of a lack of planning like this, I do think that perhaps there's a space to put insurance on this. They're a really important part of this conversation, but that of course brings us to 18. Unless we want to add a second person or designee to one of the other already existing spots to bring it to 19.
If I may respond to that. Yeah. So you will note that in the original I had insurance.
Yes.
And I had the Attorney General. And I think, you know, working with Meredith Hatfield and Ted Deers and saying, you know, who needs to be here all the time, more or less. Mm-hmm. And that there's some folks who obviously insurance. Yeah. And if we get to the lawsuit phase, or I mean, if anything happens about the Attorney General advice about statutory changes or potential legal actions, others, I mean, I have a feeling that the legal action is to be similar to what we saw with the MBTE, with the PFAS and with opioids, that eventually a whole bunch of states will get together, and New Hampshire will probably join one of those. So I thought for those two folks that it is better to let them be consulted as the council sees that it's important to bring them in than to have them expected to be there for every single meeting. And it's also, I thought, in a way that the Municipal Association and the BIA is another avenue for the insurance issues to be presented. So I mean, obviously I can see it both ways, but we really worked hard to trim down. And that's some folks hit the cutting floor.
Sure, sure.
I don't know if that's adequate response to your thoughts, but.
Yes, because that puts a space for them to participate under municipal and municipal association and did you say BIA? My only concern then is that when they were removed from the original, now it doesn't necessarily add in the discussion of their participation in this, you know, comprehensive look. I'm looking at page 3, particularly, well, I mean, when we, is it possible, maybe actually if you scooch back to page 2 under C, to adding in impacts on insurance?
How about this suggestion?
Sure.
If people turn on the amendment to page 3.
Yes.
Page 3. If we could add on line 20. After credit rating, comma, insurance costs.
Brilliant.
Okay, I think that's the place it should go,
and then health outcome burdens after that, right?
And then health outcome burdens after that, yeah. So insurance costs, comma, would be inserted there.
So Phil, page 3, right, line 20, insurance
Yep.
cost after credit ratings.
Thank you. I think that is now that there's a place for them to participate under BIA and municipal association, and it's specified, it can be addressed.
Senator Bertzel.
Can we do this next week? Because I'm still not convinced that this is where we need to go. And if you want it to be 5-0, I've got some background work I want to do on it.
Sure. That's fine. Yep. I'll withdraw my second. You wanna withdraw your motion?
We just wait, we
Yeah,
don't need to vote, right?
Yeah.
All right, then I'll leave it alone.
All right, Senator Bertzel, we're going to take up your bill next. Is there a motion on SB 589 local?
Ought to pass?
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Senator Waters, you had a concern about
Yes.
the gas lines. That was actually in the original, and it's in 38:29I, which was in the bill that we passed in 2021. So they basically just copied and pasted. I'd hate to pull it out and have two different versions.
So my question would be that since the bill is creating a new funding mechanism that, is needed, and I'll go for the sewers, I'm just wondering if there's a way to say that since this fund is being created, that it's not also for that. Because it seems the fund is for sewer infrastructure, not for natural gas, and nobody has any of that. So I can see what you're saying. So if it's in existing statute, but you see why why I thought about it.
I can see that it might be a concern when he gets to the House, but the House had already passed it in 2021 with it in it.
Okay.
Also, there's an amendment that we need from the
All right.
department.
Yep.
Phil, are you sure? Do you know where we wanted to put that? Yes. It had to do with providing the water or sewer. That's on.
But it also, basically it states that the condos or homeowners associations are not for profit and are not considered public utility.
Right. You got all that? All right. So we move the committee amendment.
Second.
In discussion? All in favor of the committee amendment?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none.
I'll second the committee amendment. I don't think we did that.
Okay.
I do.
Yeah. Oh, we did. Okay, all right. I'm sorry.
Is there a motion on the bill as amended?
Move on to pass as amended.
Second.
Either one, whoever you want to pick. Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none.
Move
Would
to
you like it
consent.
on consent? Yes.
Second?
Senator Bertzel said consent. Senator Pearl said yes. And discussion, all in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Okay, let's go to the study bills. Senator Bertzel. Yeah. The study on, let's see, SB 386, power generation, transmission, distribution, and storage. Is there a motion of ought to pass?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, you've got two senators.
Yep.
Do you want them or not? I mean, I think it's basically the chair would do it. I'm not sure why we'd need two, but.
We can amend that, yeah, because senators are busy. So if we want to strike 2 to 1 senator.
Well, how many does that make on the committee then?
Would you have to take one member of the House out too, then you get the odd?
We have a lot of study committees that are 1 and 3.
Yes, we
Yeah.
do.
So I don't think it's I mean, I don't know, we'll do whatever you want.
Yeah, 1 and 3 is fine. I think, the more members, the better, but I just, yeah, we did one with three members of the House on landfill, so.
Yeah, so.
1 senator. So we'll just change it to one senator, if that's okay. Everybody in concur with that? All right, and 3 members of the House.
So I'll move that amendment.
Second by Senator Bertzel. All in favor of the committee amendment?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. All in favor?
Move up to pass as amended.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent? Consent. Second. All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Desalinization.
Who's going to take it up?
Are you taking it out?
I'll take that one out. The whole thing on SB 301, I know it's just a study, and we can tease out information. I'll volunteer to run it. I don't
move
want
on
to.
to pass.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I would like to make one suggestion. Well, all right, I'll second that.
Okay, discussion.
And I'd suggest we change the 3 members of the Senate to 1.
I'm gonna have 12, but that's okay. That's fine.
That'd be
Well-
line 5.
Yeah. 9-5.
No, I would like, if you're gonna reduce that, then it'd be 2, because I'd like to be on this. As a member of the Seacoast, I
Would
would like
love
to.
you to be on it with me.
Just
Great.
traditionally, we do 1 member of the Senate on these.
We-
That's why we traditionally do this. But I
I
don't-
think that
I'm opposed
this
to-
is unneeded, but if you're gonna do something about us, then it has to be with us, so.
I'm fine with you. I don't-
2, we'll have 2.
3 senators?
2 senators.
2 senators.
2
Okay,
senators.
Good. 2 is good.
And 3 House members.
2 is good.
All right. So, all in favor of the committee amendment?
Are we done discussing?
No, I said, we're talking about the committee amendment.
Okay, but are we done amending?
Not yet.
Oh, all right, so you were just about to vote on this
On the-
committee amendment.
On that particular part, yeah.
Oh, we're gonna break it apart, okay.
Yeah. All in favor of that?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Okay, further discussion.
So the committee there's established a committee to study putting a desalinization plant on the seacoast, but the act is relative to establishing a committee to study the possibility. So I would love for the act to be reflective of the committee established, because the committee established presupposes that we're gonna put one there. So, given the fact that none of the previous information, particularly the interim report on long-term Seacoast Commission on Drinking Water, which just came out November 23rd, and none of the, there's lots of information that with all due respect, you could read before we start to pull people in to have to do an entire study committee. There's all this information is out there to satisfy the curiosity, and perhaps if it's not enough, then we move forward at a later date.
Yeah.
But it's all there without us all having to come to Concord to.
Well, I like it to put it in the forefront, and that's why I did bring it up there. And I do like to set up the stage for the need for a possibility of a Plan B. And so
I'm sorry, Plan B? What is that? I'm sorry. What
A
is,
Plan B, meaning in case there's a natural disaster, or there's a terrorist attack, or there's something outside our immediate vision of what could possibly go wrong with our water supply.
Okay, with
possibility's
respect to
fine.
the goal, which is, your stated goal would be to provide for a Plan B for our water supply, right? Then should we not look at other possibilities besides desalinization, like reverse osmosis or bringing water in from other sources? Because if the Plan B is to provide safe and clean drinking water, there are lots of other ways to get to that space.
But wouldn't the individual that you bring in from the commission would,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you at the beginning.
the individuals that you bring in from the commission that you're gonna ask to testify should be able to bring some of that information forward to the committee.
Not as stated by this, because this is just about putting a desalinization plant on the seacoast, not about exploring the possibility of a reverse osmosis plant or bringing in and having, water supply tanks, a tank field being built in some space to put, water in for these possible terrorist attacks or natural disasters, or, you know, what you're telling us is the impetus for wanting to do this is to make sure that there is safe, clean drinking water in the event that what we have now to provide safe, clean drinking water fails.
But the commission can still present the study and talk about what they've discussed, including the possibility of this desalination plant.
Right, but if we're going to only focus on desalination,
they can still bring up their study and what they've
only on
accomplished.
desalination, because this is only about desalination. If we're going to talk about other things, let's put the other things in there as part of the study. Since then, if that's what we want to do, if we're only going to be looking at desalination, then we're going to look at desalination, because that's what's statutorily, that was what would be statutorily demanded. If it's,
I disagree, because as the number of times that I've been on the commission for PTSD, we have our duties, but a lot of times what happens is the duties present themselves in other directions, and we follow that as well. The committee can do the same thing.
One of the things that came up during the landfill study was the fact that this came up, actually. And I did talk with Senator Stiles, and she said that there was a desalinization plant at one time around the seacoast, because I brought that up to her maybe a year ago, because I've been toying with this idea for a while. And the reason it was brought up during the landfill bill was the fact that, well, we can reduce the impact of the landfills by 2/3 if you incinerate. And with the incineration, you could create energy. And with energy, you could possibly run a desalinization plant. Just thinking outside the box, just wanting to see if there's somewhere we can connect the dots. But then we got to thinking about the desalinization plant and possibilities. I mean, I don't have a problem with osmosis. That would be with the fresh water, would it not?
well, you would want a study where that would, you know.
I have no problem with that, but I think I would like to at least look at the possibilities of the desalinization plant.
Well, isn't osmosis one of the ways you desalinate?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that kind of the prime way you do it?
I don't know.
It is not, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's
a chemical process, so we're talking about introducing another set of chemicals onto the seacoast. Who's already trying to remediate a set of chemicals that have been introduced. So you can see why perhaps had you consulted anyone on the seacoast, they would be a little reluctant to talk about bringing in a method of producing water that introduces yet another set of chemicals that can subsequently get into the brackish water of Great Bay, because you have to do this in brackish water. There's a lot of information that exists, including this report from November 1st of 2023 that had been the annual interim report on the Long-Term Seacoast Commission on Drinking Water. So this is work that we're doing, that the state is already engaged in doing. And again, there's so much information that we have already done that is available right now for us to take in and then decide, do we need to go further, or are there other things in the work that's already done that we can move forward with other legislation? Or do we want to spend the summer talking about a type of method of producing drinking water that includes extreme chemicals that have to be disposed of? Again, it's, I'm not making this up. It just takes looking at the information that we already have. So,
Senator, I actually agree with you, but I would say when you're worried about whether or not things are impacting your district, no one asked me about whether we wanted the Youth Development Center in Hampstead. No one asked the members of Hampstead, but we got it. And everybody around here voted for it.
So we don't always get what we want, but at least you're going to be part of the solution.
And the seacoast does belong to the rest of the state. And so this is just.
So perhaps we should also include putting a desalination plant in another spot, or just a desalination plant in New Hampshire. You know, maybe it needs to go a little further west.
Maybe Nashua.
Not suggesting that, Senator, but if you'd like it to go to Nashua, then I would encourage you to put that on here, that there are other spaces in the state that belong to all of us that could possibly support a desalination plant.
This is just a study, okay?
move
That's
the
how I'm going to
question.
leave it
Not-
at that.
but-
It's a study. And I run a study very well. And I draw information from studies that are helpful. And my studies are good. And you draw information off them. You might be an expert. The rest of us are not. And there might be a lot of information out there, but this helps the general public as well as the legislature to get engaged in the conversation. And that's where I'm gonna be voting in favor of this. So we're gonna keep it at 2 senators, and you can bring your expertise to the table. That's wonderful. But I think this is just an opportunity to tease out the information, bring it out for the public, and if that doesn't suit you, then don't vote for it. But
So I'm
at this
going
point,
to propose that we amend line 2 to, there is an established committee to study putting a desalinization plant in New Hampshire.
Is there a
So
second?
would there be a second to that?
Sure. It's,
Discussion.
is that okay, Mr. Chairman? It doesn't make.
I could care less.
I mean, it's, the only place you get salt water, brackish water is on the coast, so. But
It's semantics to me, so I don't care one way or the other.
Fine. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Ayes have it. Is there a motion to move forward with this?
Move us to adopt the committee amendment.
Is there a second? Okay,
I'll second it.
so the water seconds it.
Yeah.
All in favor of the committee amendments? Amendment, this new one.
Okay, so this is just the new one.
This is just this new one.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nope.
The ayes have it. Is there a motion to move as amended?
So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second. All in favor of ought to pass as amended?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, the ayes have it. I'll take it out.
All right.
And with that, we're going to motion to move out of exec.
So moved.
And I second it. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, and we are done. Good work, everyone.
Kevin, on a couple of the bills,
Yeah.
waiting efficiently and